She looked straight into her husband's eyes, and she spoke the words no man could ever forget. "Where I go is none of your business." In that instant, his chest tightened as if gripped by an iron hand. The woman who once swore she would die for him now looked at him like a stranger. He sat in silence, the whiskey glass half full. Her heels clicked across the floor, cold and sharp, before the door slammed shut. The house fell into a hollow silence, heavy, suffocating. Hours later, his phone lit up. Photos spilled across the screen, each one cutting deeper than a blade. His wife hand in hand with another man, her radiant smile, the wine, the candlelight. And, finally, the hotel doors closing behind them. At 5 p.m., she returned, cheeks still flushed, lips curved after a day of betrayal. But she froze on the porch. Her suitcases were lined neatly at the door. The keys she once owned no longer fit the lock. Brothers, what would you do if the woman you gave your youth, your protection, your whole heart, turned her back and spat on your pride like that? What would you do? Share your thoughts. Your story might be the one that wakes another man up. I sat in that silence for a long time, the kind that presses against your ribs until you can hardly breathe. The whiskey glass still rested in my hand, but I couldn't bring myself to swallow another drop. Every sound in the house seemed louder. The hum of the fridge, the ticking of the clock, even the creak of the old floorboards. Each one reminded me she was gone, not just for the night, but in every way that mattered. I stared at the door. She had slammed the same door we once painted together when we bought this house. Back then, she had laughed, smearing paint across my cheek, saying it would always be our home. Tonight, that door felt like a border. On the other side of it, she was already lost to me. A thought cut through the fog. I didn't want suspicion anymore. I wanted truth. Cold, undeniable truth. My hand moved almost on its own, unlocking my phone, scrolling to a number I had saved years ago but never used. A private investigator I'd met at a Chamber of Commerce gala. He told me, almost as a joke, "One day, you might need me." Tonight, that day had come. I hesitated as my thumb hovered over his name. Henderson. That was it. A man I'd barely spoken to yet tonight, his number burned in my hand like a lifeline. My pulse thudded heavy in my ears. For a moment, I wondered if this was weakness calling another man to dig through the shadows of my marriage. But then I remembered her eyes, the way her voice cut me down. "None of your business." I pressed the call. The line clicked once, then twice. A steady voice answered, brisk, no nonsense. "Henderson speaking. This is Mark Ellison." I said, my voice rougher than I expected. "We met 2 years ago. You gave me your card." A pause, then a faint chuckle. "Ah, I remember. What can I do for you, Mr. Ellison?" I looked at the empty doorway, at the silence echoing where her laughter used to be. My jaw clenched. "I need you to follow my wife. Tonight. I want to know where she goes, who she meets. Everything." Henderson didn't flinch. "Send me her photo and number. Consider it done." The call ended. The house was still. But inside me, something had shifted. Grief was turning into steel. That night felt endless. I couldn't bring myself to sleep, couldn't even close my eyes for more than a few seconds. Every time I did, I saw her face tilted toward someone else, smiling the way she used to smile at me. I paced the living room like a man trapped in his own skin glass, in hand, but untouched. The whiskey had lost its fire. It only tasted bitter now. I kept replaying our past as if some memory might explain this present. The first time I saw her in college, the way her hand slipped into mine at our wedding, the night she whispered she couldn't breathe without me. Where had that woman gone? Or had she been gone long before tonight, and I'd just been too blind to notice? Around 2 in the morning, my phone buzzed once, a short message from Henderson working. "I'll update you in the morning." That was it. No details, no comfort. Just proof that the wheels were in motion. I sank into the couch, staring at the shadows stretching across the walls. Sleep never came. Only a growing clarity did. By tomorrow, I would know the truth. And once I knew, nothing would ever be the same again. Morning came, though it didn't feel like it. My body had been stretched thin by hours of silence, the kind that eats at you from the inside. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling fan, counting each slow turn, like a metronome marking the end of an old life. At 7:15, the phone buzzed. Henderson's name lit the screen. My hand was heavy, but I answered. Mr. Ellison, his voice was brisk, clipped, professional. "You were right to call me." Those words sank into me like lead. My throat tightened. "Tell me." She met a man last night. Older, wealthy. The kind who doesn't check price tags. They dined at Laird's, then drove to the Windsor Hotel. His voice didn't waver. I caught photos. Her hand on his arm. Champagne glasses clinking. They checked in together. I closed my eyes, but it didn't soften the blow. The image burned anyway, her slipping into satin sheets that weren't ours. Send me everything, I said. My voice surprised me. No shouting, no anger, just cold finality. As you wish. You'll have the full report before noon. The call ended. The house was silent again, but now the silence wasn't empty. It was loaded heavy with a truth I could never unlearn. By noon, the email arrived. A soft chime, almost polite for something that would shatter me. I stared at the subject line, report attached. My hand hovered over the screen, trembling. Part of me wanted to delete it, unread, to cling to whatever illusions I had left. But illusions were for men too weak to face the truth. I tapped. Photos bloomed across the screen, one by one. Evelyn stepping out of a black car silk dress, hugging her figure. Evelyn smiling across a candlelit table, her hand brushing against his sleeve. Evelyn leaning close, her lips parted in a laugh I hadn't heard in years. And then the one that finished me. The Windsor Hotel entrance. His hand pressed to the small of her back, guiding her inside like he owned her. My wife. My partner. My forever walking willingly into another man's arms. I exhaled slowly, though the air felt like glass in my lungs. No rage, no screaming, just a chilling clarity. The woman I once loved didn't exist anymore. I scrolled once more, then set the phone down on the table. My decision was already forming. Not about forgiveness. Not even about confrontation. It was about ending this. On my terms. By mid-afternoon, I couldn't sit still anymore. The house felt tainted, every corner echoing with her absence, or worse, her betrayal. I opened a drawer and pulled out a card I had tucked away a year ago after a break-in down the street. A locksmith's number. Back then, Evelyn had laughed when I suggested upgrading our locks. Who would bother robbing us, she'd teased. Now I dialed. Quick, secure locksmith's morning service. Yes, I said, voice steady. I want every lock in the house replaced. Front door, back side, entry garage. All of them. Today. We can be there by 9. I'll be waiting. When the call ended, I walked into the bedroom and opened the closet. Her side still smelled faintly of perfume. I pulled down the matching suitcases, laid them open on the floor, and began to fold. Dresses she wore to weddings. Blouses I'd bought her on birthdays. Shoes still polished from nights we once danced together. Each piece went in carefully, almost reverently. But with every fold, I felt the weight of something closing like stone sealing a tomb. By the time I zipped the last suitcase shut, I knew the man who once adored her was gone. What remained was someone colder, someone she would never see coming. At exactly 9, the doorbell chimed. The sound echoed sharp through the house. I opened the door to find a stocky man in overalls, toolbox in hand. His van idled in the driveway, the words, "Quick Secure Locksmiths," fading on its side. "You Mr. Ellison?" he asked. I nodded. "Come in, change everything, every lock." He whistled softly as he looked over the doors. Must have had a scare. Something like that, I thought, though. I only gave him a thin smile. The drill's whirred, metal clinked against metal, a steady rhythm like nails being driven into a coffin. I carried her packed suitcases one by one, stacking them neatly by the front door. 4 of them in total. Her whole life with me, reduced to luggage lined up in a row. When the locksmith finished, he handed me a new ring of keys. The metal was cold in my palm. "All done," he said. "No one gets in without your say-so." I thanked him, and when his van finally pulled away, I stood at the threshold. The house behind me silent, fortified. The suitcases waiting on the porch like evidence ready for judgment. And I realized with a grim kind of peace that this home no longer belonged to her. It had chosen me. At 5 o'clock sharp, her heels clicked against the pavement, outside. I didn't need to be there to imagine it. Henderson had already told me where she'd spent the night, and by now she must have been floating on the glow of satin sheets and expensive wine. She came up the walkway, smiling, expecting comfort, expecting home. Instead, she froze. 4 suitcases sat lined neatly on the porch, arranged like unwanted parcels. For a moment, she didn't move, just stared, her brain scrambling to process what her eyes already knew. Then she rushed forward, yanking her keys from her purse. The metal scraped inside the lock, turned halfway, then jammed. She twisted harder. Nothing. She tried again. The lock refused her. "Mark," she shouted, pounding her fist against the door. "Open this door! You can't do this to me!" But the house remained silent. Its windows reflected her panic back at her, cold and unblinking. I wasn't inside. I wasn't anywhere she could reach. The same home where she once whispered she felt safest had rejected her. And the man she had once sworn she couldn't live without had vanished into silence. Her fists must have ached from pounding that door, but the house gave her nothing. So she grabbed her phone thumb, trembling as she dialed my number. Straight to voicemail. She tried again. Same result. Again and again until the automated voice became another wall slamming in her face. Fine, she muttered. Daniel will know where he is. She called my oldest friend. 2 rings, then silence. He cut her off before she could speak. Her chest tightened. One more name, one more chance. She scrolled, landed on him, the man she had risked everything for. The man who'd wrapped his hand around her waist at the hotel doors. She pressed call, pressing the phone to her ear like salvation. It connected, but a woman's voice answered, sharp, possessive. Who is this? Evelyn froze. Her lips parted, but no words came. The line went dead. She stood on the porch, her suitcases like a jury around her. Behind her, children laughed on bicycles. Neighbors whispered from their lawns. Every call she made fell into silence or rejection. And for the first time, she realized the truth. She had nowhere left to go. When the calls gave her nothing but silence, Evelyn did the only thing left. She hailed a car and rattled off an address she had never imagined she would need again, her parents' home. The ride must have felt endless. Her suitcases knocked against each other in the trunk, every bump on the road sounding like judgment. By the time she stepped onto the cracked stone path leading up to their porch, her mascara had streaked her hair frizzed from the evening air. She paused, wiping her cheeks with trembling fingers, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her mother opened the door before she could knock. Her gaze flicked from the luggage to her daughter's swollen eyes. Shock. Then something harder. Mom, can I stay? Evelyn's voice cracked like glass. Her mother stepped aside without a word. Inside, her father sat in his armchair, newspaper sliding from his hand. His eyes held no anger, only the heavy weight of disappointment. That silence was worse than any lecture. Evelyn wheeled her bags down the hall into the spare room, closing the door quickly behind her, shutting out their stares. But she couldn't shut out the truth. Even here, she wasn't welcome. The spare bedroom smelled faintly of lavender, the same scent her mother used in the linens. It should have been comforting, but to Evelyn, it felt like a cage. She sat on the edge of the bed, suitcase, half-open phone, clutched in her hand like a lifeline. She scrolled through her messages again. Nothing from me. Not a word. No text. No demand for answers. Not even anger. The silence was 1,000 times worse than shouting. From the kitchen, muffled voices slipped through the thin walls. Her mother's sigh, her father's low murmur, the words impossible to catch, but heavy with judgment. Evelyn pressed her hands over her ears, trying to block them out, but the shame seeped through anyway. She tried calling a friend. The reply came clipped, apologetic fake. Sorry, Evie. I can't tonight. Family in town. Another excuse. Another door closing. Alone in the borrowed bed, Evelyn stared at the ceiling. The house wasn't hers. The bed wasn't hers. Even the air felt borrowed. And in the dark, one thought gnawed at her more than all the whispers and stares she had been replaced. Not by another woman, but by my silence. The next morning, I drove downtown with a folder tucked neatly on the passenger seat. IDs, account numbers, the paperwork I had prepared in silence, while she laughed in another man's arms. The city bustled around me, horns, crosswalks, office workers clutching coffee cups. For them, it was just another Tuesday. For me, it was the day I erased her. Inside the bank, everything smelled of polished wood and disinfectant, sterile and calm. I walked to the counter with steady steps. No hesitation. Good morning, sir. How can I help you? The teller asked, smiling. I placed the folder in front of her. I want to transfer all funds from this account into a new one under my name only, then close every linked access permanently. Her fingers paused over the keyboard. She blinked, then nodded. Of course. May I see your ID? I slid it across, watching her type numbers flashing across the screen. Balances Evelyn would never touch again. She asked, internal transfer or to another branch. Another branch, I said. This one she'll never know exists. When the papers came, I signed with a calm hand. Each stroke of ink cut her further out of my life. The teller slid the final forms across the desk. Please sign here, sir. This will remove any secondary access and make the new account strictly under your control. I picked up the pen. My hand didn't shake. The signature flowed smooth and final, as if I'd rehearsed it 1,000 times in my head. When the last stroke dried, it felt less like ink and more like a blade slicing through the last thread that tied her to me. "Would you like a card or cashier's check today?" she asked. "Both," I said. "Issue them now." Minutes later, an envelope slid across the counter. New card, new account details, everything sealed under my name alone. I tucked it neatly into my folder like a surgeon placing instruments back in their case. "One last thing," I said, pausing. "Flag the transfer. Make sure any attempt to reverse it is blocked." She hesitated, then nodded. "That's automatic once the wire clears." Good. I walked out into the afternoon sun. The street hummed with ordinary life, but my own world had shifted. For the first time since that night, I allowed myself a thin smile. She thought she had secrets, but mine would ruin her. She dragged her suitcases into the marble lobby of a downtown hotel, head held high, as if pride alone could erase the whispers trailing her. The receptionist smiled politely, tapping at the computer as Evelyn slid her card across the counter. A beep. The smile faltered. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Insufficient funds." "That's not possible," Evelyn snapped, shoving another card forward. Another beep. Denied. Her pulse spiked. She reached for a third. Declined again. The receptionist's expression shifted from professional to pity, the kind that stings worse than outright scorn. "Perhaps you'd like to try another method of payment," the woman suggested gently. Evelyn could feel the eyes of strangers at her back. Heat crawled up her neck, humiliation choking her throat. She grabbed her cards, forcing a brittle laugh. "It must be a system error. I'll handle it." She stormed out before the pity in those eyes burned through her skin. On the curb, she clutched her phone, scrolling through balances she couldn't believe. Zeros where there had once been comfort. Locks on accounts she thought were hers. The man she thought she could dismiss with a sentence had cut her off without a word. By noon, I was seated in a quiet office across from a woman in a navy suit, the kind of lawyer who wasted no time on pleasantries. Daniel had recommended her, said she specialized in cases like mine. I laid the folder on her desk. Henderson's photographs, hotel receipts, the prenup Evelyn once laughed at, saying we'd never need it. My signature still fresh from the bank papers. She leafed through the stack, her eyes sharp, her movements efficient. When she looked up, she didn't smile, she simply nodded. "You have everything. This will be clean. The prenup is ironclad. With this evidence, the court won't hesitate." I leaned back in the chair, breathing slowly. "File it today." "Of course." She tapped her keyboard, the soft clatter of keys sounding like nails sealing a coffin. "By evening, it'll be entered into record." I signed where she pointed my pen, moving steady. For me, this wasn't just paperwork. It was a scalpel. A final incision to cut away what had already rotted. As I stood to leave, she said, "You understand, once this is filed, there's no pause button." I met her eyes. "That's the point." By the time Evelyn dragged her suitcases back to her parents' porch, the sun was slipping low and the air carried the chill of early night. Each wheel rattled against the stone path loud enough to wake the neighbors. She hated the sound. It made her feel exposed, as if the entire street knew she no longer belonged anywhere. Her mother opened the door before she could knock. The older woman's eyes widened at the sight of the luggage, then softened with something between sorrow and reproach. "Can I stay?" Evelyn whispered, her voice thin, brittle. Her mother stepped aside, silent. Inside, her father sat stiff in his chair, newspaper drooping in his hands. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The disappointment in his eyes landed harder than any words. Evelyn forced a weak smile. "Just a little disagreement with Mark. It'll blow over." Her father looked back at the paper, refusing to answer. Her mother gestured toward the spare bedroom. Evelyn wheeled the suitcases inside and shut the door too quickly, as if that could block the weight of their judgment. But it followed her anyway. She had a roof, yes, but no home. By the time the legal papers were filed, I knew I couldn't stay in that house any longer. It wasn't fear that drove me out. It was clarity. The walls still smelled like her perfume. Every drawer held reminders of the life I was erasing. I wanted distance, clean air. I packed a small duffel, a few changes of clothes, my laptop documents I couldn't risk leaving behind. The suitcases on the porch were still lined, neatly waiting for her return. I didn't touch them. They weren't my burden anymore. I carried the duffel out to my car, parked a few houses down. Neighbors waved as I passed, smiling in their usual suburban way, oblivious to the quiet war unfolding behind my front door. I waved back my face, calm, the picture of composure. Inside steel was setting in my veins. Daniel opened his apartment door before I could knock. "You look like hell," he said. I handed him the bag. "I need a place for a few days." He didn't ask questions. He just nodded, stepping aside. For the first time in days, I exhaled. Not relief, just resolve. The chessboard was set. All that was left was to play the game. Daniel's place was quiet, the hum of the fridge the only sound as I sat at his kitchen table. My phone buzzed Henderson's name glowing on the screen. The full file had arrived. I opened it slowly, each swipe of my finger peeling back the last illusion of love. There she was, stepping out of a sleek car, her hand brushing against his sleeve. Another photo, her head tilted back, laughing candlelight painting her smile. Another, his hand at the small of her back, guiding her through the hotel doors. The timestamps were precise. The receipts undeniable. Daniel leaned against the counter, arms crossed. So it's true. I didn't answer. I forwarded the entire file to a private email Evelyn had never known, where it sat next to our prenuptial agreement, ready for court. "You going to confront her?" Daniel asked carefully. "No," I said. My voice was even almost flat. "I'm going to take everything she thinks she can fall back on." Daniel studied me, then gave a slow nod. He understood. I closed the report and set the phone down. The evidence wasn't just proof. It was a weapon. And now it was mine. The next morning, Evelyn tried again. She dressed carefully, painted her face, and walked back to the house as if pride alone might unlock the door. "Oi." She lingered by the gate, phone in hand, pretending to scroll, while her eyes searched the driveway. Neighbors were out. A woman watering her lawn, a man collecting mail. They didn't stare directly, but she caught the glances. Quick sideways, then whispered words traded behind cupped hands. Her stomach knotted. She stood there longer than she should have, forcing herself to look casual, as if waiting for her husband to return from an errand. But he didn't. The curtain stayed still, the porch silent. Finally, she turned back toward her parents' house. She could feel eyes following her. A child's laugh rang out on the sidewalk, but she swore she heard the hiss of a voice. "Is that her?" Her pace quickened, shoes snapping against the pavement, the heat of shame crawling across her neck. She hated how small she felt, hated the way people didn't need to say her name for her to know she was the subject. Every step reminded her she hadn't just lost her husband. She was losing her world. 2 days later, I sat again in the lawyer's office. The folder now heavier with Henderson's full report, every photograph, every receipt cataloged with the precision of evidence in a trial. She read silently, pen tapping against the desk. Finally, she looked up. "This is airtight. With the prenup and the documentation, the court won't give her a dime." I gave a single nod. No smile, no relief, just confirmation of what I already knew. "We can file the petition immediately. Once it's entered, she'll be served within days." "Do it," I said. She typed swiftly, the keys clattering like the slow drumbeat of inevitability. She slid the papers toward me, each page marked with small yellow tabs. I signed them one by one, the motion steady, detached, almost mechanical. When the last sheet was done, she stacked the pages neatly and said, "It's official. Today is the beginning of the end." I stood, straightened my jacket. "No," I said quietly, "it's the end of the beginning." Outside, the sun was bright, almost mocking. People hurried along the sidewalks, chasing ordinary lives. They didn't know a war had just been declared, one that Evelyn had already lost. By the third night, Evelyn couldn't take the walls of her parents' house anymore. Their silence weighed heavier than their words ever could. So she dressed, painted her lips, and called the women who once filled her weekends with brunches and wine-soaked gossip. One by one they answered, and one by one they cut her off. "I'm busy tonight, Evie. Sorry. Not a good time. We'll talk soon. Family in town, maybe next week." The excuses piled up, brittle and insincere. She knew the tone. She had used it herself once to distance from someone whose life had soured. Now it was being used on her. At the third call, the line went dead before she could even finish her sentence. She stared at her phone, the silence roaring in her ears. Friends who had laughed with her in restaurants, who had whispered in her ear about better men, richer men, were gone. They weren't standing beside her now, not when her name had become poison. She slammed the phone down, chest-tightening shame crawling up her throat. She wasn't just locked out of her marriage. She was locked out of the world she thought she controlled. Late that night, when the excuses from her friends had all blurred into silence, Evelyn sat on the edge of the guest bed, phone clutched in her hand. Her pulse thudded in her ears. There was only one number left, the man she had risked everything for, the one she had imagined would rescue her when the walls closed in. She pressed call. The ring felt endless, each second a plea. Finally, the line connected, but it wasn't his voice. Who is this A woman? Cool, sharp, laced with ownership. Evelyn froze. I'm looking for the woman. Cut her off the words like a blade. Don't call here again. The line went dead. Her phone slipped from her hand onto the floor screen, glowing faintly against the dark. For a long moment, she just sat there staring at nothing, her breath caught in her chest. She had thrown her marriage away for a man who had already replaced her. The affair that once made her feel powerful, untouchable, now mocked her with silence and rejection. For the first time since that night, Evelyn realized she hadn't just lost Mark. She had lost everything. The following morning, my phone buzzed with a new email from my lawyer. I opened it without hesitation. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Filed. Case number attached. Just like that, it was no longer a thought, no longer a plan whispered in the quiet corners of my mind. It was real. Stamped. Entered into record. I scrolled through the attached documents. My lawyer had included everything: Henderson's photos, the hotel receipts, the prenup highlighted like a warning sign she had ignored years ago. There it was, in black and white. She would walk away with nothing. I felt no surge of triumph, no wild rush of satisfaction, only a deep, steady calm. The kind of calm a surgeon feels after closing a wound, knowing the rot has been cut out clean. Daniel glanced over as I set the phone down. So, it's official. Yes, I said. My voice carried no heat, just finality. It's in motion now. Outside, the city kept moving. Cars passed, people hurried with coffees in hand. But for me, the world had slowed. The game was nearly over. She just didn't know it yet. On the fifth morning, the air in her parents' kitchen felt heavy, thick with silence. Evelyn sat in her robe, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee she hadn't touched. 4 days had crawled by without a single word from me. No call, no text, not even anger. The silence gnawed at her worse than rage ever could. The doorbell rang. Her mother answered, then returned carrying 2 thick manila envelopes. She set them on the table with quiet unease. These are for you. Evelyn's hands trembled as she tore one open. The first page froze her blood. Petition for divorce. My name printed sharp and final above hers. She rifled through the stapled pages, desperate for a mistake, a loophole, but the prenup glared back, clauses, highlighted walls closing in from every side. No, her whisper cracked. The second envelope slid open, spilling photographs across the table. Her face captured in merciless detail, laughing at another man's joke, stepping into the Windsor Hotel with his hand pressed to her back. The receipts followed, time-stamped, undeniable. Her father stood abruptly, his chair scraping the tile. Her mother covered her mouth. Evelyn collapsed against the table, clutching the glossy evidence as if she could rip the truth away. But the truth was final. She was finished. The photographs scattered across the table like shards of glass. Evelyn tried to gather them, her hands trembling, but the images slipped through her fingers. Each one screamed the truth louder than her voice ever could. It's not, she stammered, the lie collapsing before it even formed. Her throat closed around the words. Her father's jaw tightened. His voice, when it came, was low and final. Enough. The single word cut deeper than 100 accusations. Evelyn flinched as if struck. Her mother reached forward, not to comfort, but to pull the photographs from her hands, as though even touching them was unbearable. She couldn't meet her daughter's eyes. Evelyn folded in on herself, sobs shaking her shoulders. She pressed her palms against her face, desperate to hide, but there was nowhere to hide from what lay on the table. The prenup, the petition, the receipts. Her shame laid bare in black and white. She had thought silence meant there was still a chance that she could explain, persuade, win me back. But now she understood my silence had been a trap. While she begged shadows, I had prepared her public execution, and her parents were her first witnesses. I didn't need to be there when the envelopes landed in her hands. I could picture it clearly enough, the shock, the scrambling, the collapse. Henderson's photos, the prenup she once mocked, my signature on the petition. It was all designed for one purpose, to speak louder than I ever could. I didn't text. I didn't call. There was no need. Words give hope. Silence takes it away. At Daniel's apartment, I sat by the window, watching the city move beneath me, people rushing to work, laughing into phones, children tugging at their parents' hands. The ordinary rhythm of life For me, it was strangely still, as if time itself had slowed to let me breathe again. Daniel brought me coffee, setting it down without asking questions. He studied me for a moment. "You sure about this?" I didn't look at him. My eyes stayed on the street below. Once you start something like this, you can't pause. You can't rewind. And that doesn't scare you. I finally turned, met his gaze. It used to. Not anymore. Because fear was for men who still had something to lose. And she had already taken that from me. The days that followed bled together in a haze of silence. Evelyn stayed in the spare room, curtains drawn, her phone clutched like a lifeline that never rang. Each morning she emerged for coffee, but the kitchen felt colder than any hotel lobby. Her father barely looked at her, his newspaper raised like a shield. Her mother moved softly around the kitchen, lips pressed tight, eyes shadowed with disappointment. They didn't ask questions. They didn't need to. The envelopes on the table had said everything. At night, Evelyn lay awake, hearing the low murmur of their voices through the thin walls. Words blurred, but the tone was unmistakable: disbelief, shame, regret. She pressed her hands to her ears, but it didn't stop the sound. It only trapped it inside her. She tried calling friends again. No answer. She scrolled through old photos, swiping past smiles that felt like they belonged to someone else's life. Once she thought home was wherever she chose to stand. But now, even under her parents' roof, she was a guest. An unwelcome one. The worst part wasn't the silence of her parents or her friends. It was mine. By the third morning, desperation overruled pride. Evelyn dressed carefully, pulled on dark sunglasses to hide the swelling around her eyes, and called a cab across town. She gave the driver the address of my office, the place where she was sure she could find me, where she could force me to listen. The lobby was quiet, professional. She approached the receptionist's voice, low but urgent. "I'm here to see Mark Ellison. Is he in?" The woman gave a polite, practiced smile. "I'm sorry. He isn't available today." Evelyn's hands tightened on her bag. "I'll wait." So she did. For hours. She paced the tiles, sat stiff on the couch, pretended to scroll through her phone. Every sound of footsteps in the hall made her lift her head, expecting me to appear. But evening came and the lights dimmed. The receptionist returned her smile, softer now. "I'm afraid you'll have to leave, ma'am. He's not here." Evelyn walked out slowly, sunglasses slipping from her face. The street lamps flickered on and she realized the truth. She hadn't been ignored. I had never been there at all. While Evelyn wandered lobbies chasing shadows, I sat in my lawyer's office once more. The documents were stacked, neatly clipped, and sealed, ready for the next step. My lawyer tapped the folder with one manicured finger. "All that remains is service. Once she's handed these, the clock starts. She'll have no ground to stand on." I nodded. "Make it clean. I don't want confrontation, no scene. Just official." She adjusted her glasses. "We'll use a process server. Neutral, professional. It will happen at her parents' home, quietly." I slid the retainer check across the desk, the ink from my signature barely dry. The action was simple, almost boring, but it carried the weight of a hammer striking stone. As I rose to leave, my lawyer said, "She'll know within 48 hours. "I want her to know sooner," I said flatly. She paused, then nodded once. "It'll be done." Back on the street, the city bustled around me. I moved through the crowd unnoticed, another face among thousands. But inside, I carried a strange calm. Soon she would hold the papers in her hands, feel their weight, and understand what silence had been preparing all along the end. It happened on a gray morning. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table, untouched toast cooling on her plate, her robe still wrapped tight around her. The doorbell rang. She looked up startled as her mother went to answer. A man stood on the porch, dressed neatly, holding a clipboard and a large envelope. His tone was polite, rehearsed. "Evelyn Ellison." She appeared in the doorway, confused. "Yes." He handed her the envelope. "You've been served." Then he turned and walked back down the path without another word. Her fingers shook as she ripped it open. The same papers, the same petition, only now stamped and dated, official beyond denial. Her father's gaze rose from the newspaper. He said nothing, but his jaw tightened. Her mother's eyes shimmered with tears she didn't allow to fall. Evelyn's lips moved, but no sound came. She wanted to scream, to fight, to claim it wasn't over. Instead, she sank into a chair, the envelope limp in her hands, her eyes burning as the weight of it settled. This wasn't just an argument, not a fight she could charm her way out of. This was the law, and it had chosen my side. I didn't need a call to know the moment had come. At exactly 9:37 a.m., I glanced at the clock on Daniel's kitchen wall and felt it in my bones. Somewhere across town, a knock had landed on her parents' door. A stranger in a pressed shirt had spoken her name. An envelope had changed hands. By now, she would have torn it open, seen the seal, read the words. By now, her world would be caving in. I sat at the table, coffee cooling in front of me, the city humming beyond the window. Daniel hovered in the doorway, studying me carefully. "You think she's read it yet?" I didn't answer right away. I took a slow sip, set the cup down, let the silence hang. Then I said, "She has. And she knows." There was no triumph in my voice, no fire, only certainty. The law had spoken where I didn't have to. My silence had carried her this far, and now the petition would carry her the rest of the way. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't even need to be there. The clock was already working for me. By the afternoon, everyone seemed to know. Evelyn couldn't step outside without feeling it. The whispers, the side glances, the way conversation dipped whenever she walked past. She carried a bag of groceries up her parents' driveway, trying to hold her chin high, but her hands trembled around the plastic handles. A woman across the street bent to check her mailbox, stealing a glance that lingered just a little too long. Two teenagers on bicycles slowed, smirking, before they rode off, their laughter floating back on the wind. She kept her eyes fixed on the door, but it didn't matter. She felt stripped bare, as if the documents she had received that morning were plastered across her forehead for the world to read. Adulteress, divorced, nothing. Inside, she slammed the groceries onto the counter, breath ragged. Her mother started to say something, then stopped. Her father didn't even look up. It was worse than judgment. It was indifference. Evelyn pressed her palms to the edge of the counter, fighting the urge to scream. She had once been the woman people envied, the pretty wife, the hostess, the one who smiled brightest. Now she was just a story whispered at mailboxes. That night, Evelyn sat alone in the darkened spare room, phone glowing in her hand. She scrolled through her contacts again, though she already knew the list by heart. Friends had vanished. Her lover had turned cold. Even her parents, though, under the same roof, had stopped speaking beyond clipped sentences. There was only one number left, mine. Her thumb hovered over it, her chest tight, heart hammering with something closer to panic than hope. She told herself I might answer this time, that maybe, just maybe, silence had been punishment, and I was finally ready to hear her. She pressed call. The dial tone rang once, twice. Then voicemail. My voice didn't greet her. Just the automated message, cold and impersonal. She tried again, and again. Each time the same wall of silence. "Mark," she whispered into the phone, as if her voice could slip past the machine. "Please, just talk to me. We can fix this." Her words dissolved into a sob. She clutched the phone to her chest, rocking slightly, her breath broken, but I didn't answer. I never would. And in that silence, she finally understood this wasn't punishment. It was exile. The next morning, I sat across from my lawyer again, the prenup spread open on her desk. She had marked key passages in yellow, every clause reinforced with case law, every loophole sealed. "This document," she said, tapping the margin with her pen, "isn't just strong. It's bulletproof. She won't touch a cent that isn't hers, not now, not ever." I leaned forward, studying the highlighted lines. I remembered the night we signed it, Evelyn laughing, brushing it off as a formality. "We'll never need this," she had teased, slipping her hand into mine. Back then, I believed her. Now, the same paper she mocked had become my shield, my sword. My lawyer looked at me carefully. "She may try to fight, but it won't matter. With Henderson's evidence and this agreement, she has no leverage." I nodded slowly. There was no satisfaction in the motion, no rush of triumph, only clarity. The prenup wasn't just a contract anymore. It was the final nail. The proof that every step she had taken away from me had led her here to nothing. And for the first time in weeks, I felt lighter. The war was almost over. Nights were the hardest. Evelyn would lie awake in the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, listening. The walls in her parents' house were thin, too thin. She could hear their voices drifting down the hall once the lights went out. Her mother's soft murmur, heavy with sorrow. Her father's voice low and firm, punctuated by the rustle of newspaper pages. She couldn't make out every word, but she didn't need to. The tone was enough disappointment, disbelief, shame. She pressed a pillow over her ears, but the sound still seeped in, muffled but cutting. It was worse than shouting. Shouting she could argue against. This she couldn't fight. In the morning, their silence weighed more than their words ever could. Her father read at the table without looking up. Her mother moved through the kitchen briskly, never asking questions, never meeting her eyes for long. Evelyn tried to smile to make small talk, but the words died in her throat. Even here, under their roof, she was no longer a daughter. She was a burden, a stain. Every sigh behind their door, every pause in their voices told her what she feared most. She had lost them too. By the end of the week, the case had its own number in the county docket. My lawyer emailed me the confirmation, her message short and efficient. Hearing scheduled, all documentation filed, evidence entered. I sat at Daniel's kitchen table, the folder open once more, though I hardly needed to read it. I knew every page by heart now, Henderson's photos, the receipts, the prenup with its ironclad clauses. Together, they formed something stronger than any speech, stronger than rage, inevitability. Daniel watched me from across the room. So, this is it then. The beginning of the end. I shook my head. No. The end began the moment she looked me in the eye and said it was none of my business. The court is just the paperwork. I slid the folder closed, tucking it neatly into my bag. There was no weight in my hands anymore, only clarity. The law would finish what I had already started, and Evelyn, no matter how she begged, no matter how she cried, would stand before it with nothing left to shield her. For the first time since that night, I allowed myself to think of tomorrow, and I wasn't afraid. 3 days after the papers arrived, Evelyn found herself sitting at the kitchen table in her parents' house again, coffee growing cold in front of her. The silence pressed in from all sides. No calls, no texts, not from me, not from friends, not from the man she thought would save her. She tried one last time, scrolling through her contacts, her thumb hovering over familiar names. One by one, she pressed call. One by one, the lines rang out or went straight to voicemail. Even the women who used to fill her weekends with gossip and wine had vanished. Her father folded his paper sharply, stood, and left the room without a word. Her mother lingered, wringing her hands, but said nothing. Evelyn forced a smile that crumbled almost instantly. It's just a misunderstanding. He'll come around. But the words sounded hollow even to her. That night, she lay curled on the bed in the spare room, clutching her phone to her chest like a relic. Tears soaked the pillow. For the first time, she wasn't just scared of losing me. She understood she already had. And worse, she had lost herself too. The courthouse smelled faintly of paper and polish, the kind of sterile air that carried no sympathy. I walked through the metal detector with nothing but a folder under my arm. My lawyer met me at the benches, her expression sharp, efficient. It's straightforward, she said, flipping through the file one last time. The evidence is clean. The prenup is solid. All you need to do is confirm. I nodded. No nerves, no fear, just the steady rhythm of inevitability. When the clerk called my name, I stepped forward. The judge scanned the petition, Henderson's photos, the highlighted clauses. His expression didn't flicker. He'd seen it all before. Another marriage gutted by betrayal. Mr. Ellison, he said, voice flat, do you confirm these filings as your petition? Yes, Your Honor. The gavel struck once sharp and final. The sound echoed through the chamber louder than shouting, more decisive than rage. As I stepped back, my lawyer leaned in. It's done. From here, the process will move quickly. Outside, the sky was clear, the sunlight bright. I took a breath and felt nothing but calm. The law was now the blade, and I had already made the cut. By the end, there was nothing left for her to cling to. She returned to the house 3 mornings in a row, standing at the gate as if her presence alone might summon me back. The neighbors watched from their lawns, whispering behind hands. She pounded on the locked door until her fist bruised, screamed my name until her voice broke. The house stayed silent. I was gone. Back at her parents' place, she stared at the divorce petition spread across the table, the photos scattered like a jury that would never acquit her. Her father's silence pressed heavier than judgment. Her mother's pity felt like a blade. Evelyn's shoulders collapsed, her head bowing into her hands. The woman who once laughed in silk and perfume now sat stripped of everything, her pride, her security, her home. And me, I never raised my voice. I never gave her the satisfaction of seeing rage. I took everything she thought untouchable without a single word, because sometimes silence is the sharpest revenge. So let me ask you, brothers, if the woman you gave your life to looked you dead in the eye and said, "Where I go is none of your business," what would you do?